When was the last time you beat yourself up over a mistake? A missed deadline, a bad decision, a moment where you weren't good enough. If your best friend made that same mistake, would you talk to them the way you talk to yourself? Chances are, you wouldn't. You'd reassure them, tell them it's okay, that one mistake doesn't define them. But when it's you, suddenly, there's no room for kindness. Only self-criticism, only the brutal, unrelenting voice that says, you should have done better. This is the paradox of the perfectionist world we live in. We treat ourselves like we're supposed to be flawless, yet we'd never hold others to that same impossible standard. And that's where self-compassion comes in. Not self-pity, not making excuses, but the ability to be on your own side, to offer yourself the same kindness, patience, and understanding that you would give to someone you love. In this video, we're diving into why self-compassion is the antidote to perfectionism, how our culture tricks us into thinking we need to be hard on ourselves to succeed, and, most importantly, how you can start practicing real, transformative self-compassion today. Because here's the truth. If perfectionism is your default mode, you're not setting yourself up for greatness. You're setting yourself up for burnout, anxiety, and a life where nothing ever feels good enough. And trust me, there's a better way. So, what exactly is self-compassion? And why does it matter so much in a world that glorifies perfection? Self-compassion is the simple yet radical act of treating yourself with the same kindness, patience, and understanding that you'd show to a good friend. But let's be real, most of us don't do that. Instead, we hold ourselves to impossible standards, expecting flawlessness while being completely intolerant of our own mistakes. The irony? This constant self-criticism doesn't make us better, it makes us worse. Studies show that people who practice self-compassion are more motivated, more resilient, and more successful in the long run than those who rely on harsh self-judgment. Why? Because self-criticism activates our threat system, the part of our brain designed for survival. When you attack yourself with negative self-talk like, I'm so bad, I'll never be good enough, your brain reacts as if you're in danger. It releases cortisol, triggers stress, and throws you into fight or flight mode. Over time, this drains your energy, erodes your confidence, and fuels anxiety and depression. Meanwhile, self-compassion activates your care system, the part of your brain associated with safety, emotional regulation, and personal growth. Instead of spiraling into shame, you learn from your mistakes with curiosity instead of self-judgment. Kristin Neff, one of the leading researchers on self-compassion, breaks it down into 3 core components. 1. Self-kindness versus self-judgment. Instead of beating yourself up, you practice gentleness and encouragement. Imagine a coach who motivates you with support rather than insults. 2. Common humanity versus isolation. You recognize that imperfection is part of the human experience. You're not alone in your struggles. Every single person on this planet makes mistakes. 3. Mindfulness versus over-identification. Instead of drowning in negative emotions, you observe them without letting them define you. You acknowledge your feelings without exaggerating them. When you combine these 3 elements, something powerful happens. You stop seeing mistakes as evidence of your unworthiness and start seeing them as opportunities for growth. But I know what some of you might be thinking. Isn't self-compassion just an excuse to be lazy? No. And if you believe that, you've been tricked by one of the biggest lies of our perfectionist culture. We've been taught that the only way to succeed is through brutal self-discipline. That if we're not constantly pushing ourselves, if we're not our own worst critic, we'll never achieve anything meaningful. But here's the truth. Perfectionism doesn't make you better. It makes you stuck. Think about it. How many times have you procrastinated on something, not because you were lazy, but because you were afraid it wouldn't be good enough? Maybe you wanted to start a creative project, apply for a new job, or learn a new skill. But instead of taking action, you hesitated. You overthought. You convinced yourself that unless it was perfect, it wasn't worth doing. This is what perfectionism does. It paralyzes you. It turns every decision into a life or death scenario. And ironically, instead of making you excel, it keeps you trapped in fear, avoiding anything that might expose your flaws. Self-compassion, on the other hand, frees you to take action. It allows you to make mistakes without attaching your self-worth to them. It lets you try, fail, learn, and improve, because you're not obsessed with being flawless from the start. Here's a counterintuitive fact. The most successful people in the world aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who bounce back the fastest. Look at elite athletes, entrepreneurs, innovators. They fail all the time. The difference? They don't let failure define them. They don't beat themselves up into paralysis. A lot of people think that being hard on themselves is what keeps them motivated. If you had a coach who constantly yelled at you, told you that you were worthless, and made you feel like nothing you did was ever good enough, how long would you stay on that team? Not long. Yet, this is exactly how we treat ourselves. We expect to thrive under a system of constant self-punishment, when in reality, that's the fastest way to kill our own motivation. Self-compassion doesn't mean lowering your standards. It means motivating yourself with encouragement instead of fear. It's the difference between saying, I have to succeed or I'm a failure, versus, I want to succeed because I care about this, and I trust myself to grow. Which mindset do you think is more sustainable in the long run? But how do you actually practice self-compassion? Because being kind to yourself doesn't come naturally, especially if you've spent years being your own worst critic. Your inner perfectionist is like a strict, overbearing coach who refuses to quit. So, how do you retrain your mind to respond with compassion instead of judgment? Here are 3 powerful techniques you can start using today. 1. The best friend technique. Imagine this. Your closest friend just failed at something. Maybe they bombed a presentation, got rejected from a job, or made a big mistake at work. And now, they're feeling terrible. Would you say to them, "Wow, you're such an embarrassment. You'll never be good enough. Might as well give up now"? Of course not. You'd offer kindness, support, and encouragement, because that's what they need in that moment. So, why is it any different when it's you? The next time you catch yourself spiraling into self-criticism, stop. Ask yourself, if a friend were in this situation, what would I say to them? Then, say those words to yourself. At first, it'll feel unnatural. But the more you practice, the more you'll rewire your brain to respond with compassion instead of cruelty. 2. Reframe failure as data. Perfectionists see failure as proof of their inadequacy. Self-compassionate people see failure as data. Think about a scientist running an experiment. If the experiment doesn't work, they don't say, "Wow, I'm a terrible scientist." They analyze the results, make adjustments, and try again. What if you applied that same mindset to your own failures? Instead of, "I'm bad at this," try, "I'm still learning this." Instead of, "I always mess up," try, "This was one attempt. What can I learn from it?" Instead of, "I'll never get it right," try, "What small adjustment can I make next time?" When you treat failure like a lesson instead of a verdict, you stop fearing it. And when you stop fearing failure, you start growing faster than ever. 3. Break the perfectionism cycle with self-compassion breaks. Perfectionism operates in a cycle. You set impossibly high standards. You fall short because you're human. You beat yourself up for failing. You feel unmotivated, so you procrastinate or avoid trying again. And repeat. The way out of this cycle? Self-compassion breaks. Here's a simple 3-step exercise from Kristin Neff's research that you can use whenever you're struggling. 1. Acknowledge the pain. Say to yourself, "This is a tough moment. I'm struggling right now." Just recognizing your emotions without judgment is powerful. 2. Recognize your common humanity. Remind yourself, "I'm not alone in this. Everyone struggles. Mistakes are part of being human." This helps you shift from isolation to connection. 3. Offer yourself kindness. Ask, what would be the kindest thing I could do for myself right now? Maybe it's taking a break, shifting your perspective, or simply reminding yourself that you're doing your best. The more you practice this, the faster you'll break free from the perfectionist mindset, and the more you'll start moving forward with confidence instead of fear. Self-compassion is the antidote to perfectionism. Not just some feel-good idea, but a scientifically backed mindset shift that allows you to grow without self-destruction. It's not about letting yourself off the hook. It's about treating yourself like a human being. But here's the catch. Knowing this isn't enough. Because right now, your brain is still wired for perfectionism. You've spent years training it to be critical, so reversing that habit won't happen overnight. But what if, starting today, you made a small change? What if, the next time you fail at something, you catch yourself before the self-judgment spirals out of control? What if, instead of calling yourself a failure, you pause and say, "This is hard, but I'm learning." And that's okay. That one small act of kindness might not seem like much. But over time, it changes everything. So, here's your challenge. Pick one self-compassion technique and practice it this week. Just one. See what happens. Because when you finally stop treating yourself like an enemy, you unlock a version of yourself that isn't just successful, but free.